We were asked to commemorate 150 years of the publication of On the Origin of Species, and I met Darwin's great-grandson, and he pointed us to the last paragraph called An Entangled Bank. This incredible idea that we all started as the same thing, as bacteria, as like proteins, which then formed life because of the conditions of this planet, and then over millions of years it branched off like a tree of life into all these life forms. It was just absolutely amazing. So when you're making up movement to encompass this, it's pretty amazing. The whole piece starts out with a small phrase where the dancers are quite close together and they're all doing exactly the same movement. And then one of them does something quite different. And then they split into two couples, and the two couples are doing exactly the same thing. But if you look closely, one of them's actually doing something quite different. In nature, you get whole species which is the same, but every single one of those, like every single human, they're different. And it could be that small difference, if there's a change in environment, for instance, means that you might survive.
Some elements in the landscape, like rocks, will not be changing fast. They'll be changing very gradually and slowly over millennia. Grass will be changing much quicker than that, but by our standards, fairly gradually. And then animals living in the landscape will be both changing themselves quite fast, and their behavior patterns will be changing, but also they will change the landscape. So the idea is that these different kinds of change in time interact, producing misunderstandings, accidents, and absurdities also. And that is why I chose the title The Comedy of Change.
In our piece, we feel we've come up with a narrative because of the movements that Julian has written.
Several birds and animals generally, when communicating, either singing or shouting, sing in duets. And they do this sometimes usually over distances, in order to confirm that they are still aware of each other's presence, that they're still together, that they know where each other are. So you get these extraordinary duets, for instance, between the African boo-boo shrikes, which sometimes across quite wide areas of bush, they sing a tune which starts ages, a long distance away. We get a few notes there, then a few notes to the other bird, then a few notes back to the first one, back and forth, and I use that in the second movement of the piece. There's a melody which only one note is played by each instrument. So there's a kind of it's a very slow melody, because that was also the movement about something to do with these turtles in the Galapagos Islands, but it hesitantly moves from a flute to a violin to a clarinet, a cello, this thing, and as if it's sort of feeling its way across the ensemble, but it's also establishing kind of communications across the instruments. And I like that idea of the way that a purely musical device can have a metaphorical or natural parallel.
In nature, birds especially that come out to do their dances to attract a mate, when they go back to the forest, they need to be hidden, otherwise they'll become someone's lunch. So they come out of the forest, they do their dances, the mating's really quick, and then they go back and hide in the undergrowth. And Julian in the piece, he has a tune which comes out of the darkness, it sort of shimmers for a bit, and then it disappears, and then another one comes out and shimmers and then disappears. So we're working on this idea in that way, and also Kadir has come up with these costumes which are completely black at the back, and very white at the front. So you see them very clearly when they're facing the front, and when they turn and face the back, they disappear. The silver foil is to do with fossils and fossil records. And Kadir had made this work where he wrapped up his mother. So he had hundreds of figures of his mother, and it was like a shell of something that had been there not so long ago. And that's what evolution is. But we have a record of something that was there through the fossil records and now through DNA records. And so he wanted us to wrap up each other on stage with silver foil and then remove the silver foil. So there was this idea that a moment ago you had a person that was wrapped up and then you had the shell of that person. Julian Anderson has used past and future in the music. He's used it as a concept to construct some of the things, and he might, for instance, have 5 tunes going on at the same time, an old one, and then he'll add one that might be familiar to some people, and then he'll add new ones. So the whole thing goes backwards and forwards from old notes, even old chords, to things that he's just made up yesterday, to something that's been around for a little while. Through evolution, and because we are creatures with such enormous brains, we have this capacity to think, to be aware, to be responsible, and we've come so far along in terms of evolution that we, humans, people, Homo sapiens, have become the soul of the planet.